going to call this work session to order. I will be discussing the Pay for Success plan. I'm sorry, are we streaming now?
You have Facebook, it's just continued.
Okay, great. So Ms. Camacho, could you take roll?
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Mr. Peterson. Present. Mr. Constant. Mr. Dyson. Ms. Kennedy.
No, I don't think we're getting through.
Do we have any assembly members on the line right now?
Sometimes this program it auto mutes when you dial in, so if somebody from that has
Somebody's there.
to share how you unmute your phone.
Somebody has a dog.
You'll dial in and I'll mute
Right.
you. I have no idea what the code is.
Hey, this is Annie Deere from Social Finance. I'm sorry. Nancy, are we still able to hear you? I can hear you.
So,
Okay, can you hear the assembly room? I can hear the assembly room.
Austin texted me and says there's like 8 assembly members on a bridge right now, but they can't hear anything in this room.
Are they on the normal bridge or are they on the WebEx bridge?
They must be on the WebEx bridge because the normal bridge isn't on, right?
That's true. It's been dropped.
Chair Dunbar, there's a number of us that are on the WebEx bridge. Can you hear us?
Yep.
Can you hear Mr. Schiff?
Yes.
Am I in this meeting?
Yes, you are.
Who is that?
That's Mr.
Okay, so we've got.
So, I don't understand now. We've been on 4 different platforms over the course of the last week, and this is getting very unusable.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the story is with this WebEx thing. We've gotten. Zoom was one of those was because of the school district. Generally, we're just going to use the regular call-in. Yeah.
This is just, I mean, there are half a dozen of us who sat on the queue waiting for the meeting to start.
Yep. So
I think this is Nancy. I think we were hoping to use the WebEx to show the screen. And so is that not able to happen from the room?
No.
no.
Okay, all right.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Constant. We'll try to limit additional programs like this and confine ourselves. I would say probably the 2 we'll use are regular phone numbers or the Microsoft Teams, which we used with some success yesterday. Okay, so if you're an assembly member, could you please sound off? I want to see who's here.
This is Felix. I think other folks should be joining shortly. Austin told us all of the correct information for the call-in.
Okay, this is Cameron. I'm back on. I dialed in the WebEx number.
Okay.
Lots of feedback, people.
Yeah, there is some pretty bad feedback. So if they're not able to see the screen, why don't we just continue to WebEx and just switch to a regular bridge? What's the point of the WebEx?
I think it's because the other folks were already trying to do WebEx, so the administration folks were signing on that way.
Okay.
But I'm more than we can drop this line and go back to our regular line. That's easier. We just have to get that information out to the administration and the presenters.
Okay. Why don't you try to do a roll call? We'll see. Okay.
All right, so we've got Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Constant. Mr. Dyson.
Hello?
There's Austin.
Oh.
Hi, Austin.
Hi. I made it. Thank you.
everyone on the phone mute so that whoever's doing feedback can shut that down?
Ms. Kennedy? Ms. LaBrance? Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Littleton? Ms. Zalatel?
And they might all just be delayed. I just sent everyone who was on the other line this information again, so it might just take a minute for everyone to get on.
This is
I
Meg,
got
I'm here.
Crystal. Late.
So I believe we've got Mr. Constant, Ms. Kennedy, Mr. Perez-Verdia, Ms. Davidson, Mr. Rivera, Ms. Zalatel.
Okay, and if people on the bridge could please mute their phone, we're getting a lot of feedback here. Somebody with a dog, please mute your phone or your computer or whatever you're using.
It's not me, Forrest, I promise.
Weddleton's here.
Mr. Well, was that you, John?
Yeah, I'm here, so I can hear. If I'm supposed to be able to see something, I'm not aware of that that's happening.
Okay, we're gonna keep forward with this today, just because we're mostly all here. But I'm not going to use WebEx again. This has been a catastrophe.
Dice is trying to get on.
Is he okay?
I'm on.
Oh, great. Thank you, Fred. Okay, so we will we'll proceed with this now with the time we have, and then we'll wrap up. So if you could please start with this presentation. Oh, please identify yourself for the record.
Yeah, thank you. This is Eric Glatt with United Way of Anchorage. I'm here at the request of Nancy Burke in the mayor's office. And Nancy, so you know, I've queued up slide 19, which I understand is where we left off at the last meeting.
Okay.
Thank you. Would you like me to proceed, Mr. Chair?
What's that?
Would you like me to proceed?
Yeah. Oh, so you're going to go, not Eric?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, please continue. And if you guys could email this out again, make sure this presentation is emailed out to all my colleagues.
I emailed it at 1.
Oh, okay, so at 1 o'clock this was all emailed out to my colleagues, the PowerPoint, correct? Okay, great. All right, so please, when you go forward, state the number of the slide, Ms. Burke.
Okay, I will.
Thank you.
Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. Okay, so on slide 19, there is a highlighted bullet that highlights the pilot program. And in the last session, we went through a number of things about pay for success mechanism, and then this project, which is a supported housing project, Home for Good. Just as a quick reminder, the targeting people who are cycling through high levels of emergency services, using a housing intervention with enhanced services to ensure stability. And now we'd like to tell you about the pilot program, which was funded by philanthropy in the amount of $1.2 million. The Rasmussen Foundation and Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority are longtime partners on this kind of intervention and this work, so they funded this pilot program that has been operating now since July of 2019. If we turn to slide 20, you see that we have identified and the pilot phase began in July, and this was shortly after the first data integration that happened. We're using data from police, fire, sleep ops center, and homelessness. And we have a partner with the University of Alaska's Justice Information Center. They're integrating our data and helping us make a prioritized list of people who are cycling the most frequently through each of those settings. From that first list, we have 33 individuals who were identified and referred over from the mobile intervention team. That's our referral point for the municipality. They maintain the data because we have to maintain protocols around municipal data. And so the referrals come from the mobile intervention team. As you can see from this slide, we have a number that are in housing. We have some people in outreach, and then we have folks that are not housed or in outreach that we're still attempting to engage. From the number of housed people, there are 3 people that are in what we describe as bridge housing. Oftentimes there's not a unit available and the person needs to apply for some resources to get into housing. So we're using a number of bridge housing settings for that. And then we have 18 people who are in leases right now. I'm going to take a breath after each slide to see if there are questions or to make sure I'm not going too fast.
Yeah, and for my colleagues, please text me if you have a question.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when you're saying bridge housing, give an example of a location that we might be familiar with that is used as bridge housing.
It could be a hotel location. It could be a program called Henry House, which is located down on 5th Avenue and houses people frequently. So it would be a setting such as that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Please continue, Ms. Burke.
Mr. Chair, I just would add a note. When that example is one more example of concentrated homeless services in the downtown.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Burke, please continue.
Yeah, just on that note, I would like to note that the hotels we're using are in Midtown. Henry House would be the only location I'm aware of downtown at this point. So if we move...
Thank you.
You're welcome. If we move to slide 21, we'll now go into describing the ordinances, the 2 ordinances that are in front of the Assembly at this point. And so slide 22, this is a summary of the major points of the ordinance 2020-25, which is the sort of the main ordinance of this of the 2 requests we have before you. It's authorizing and approving a borrowing program for a total of $4.95 million. There are 3 sections of this total amount, if you will. $4.5 million will be outcome payment funds. $150,000 is the borrowing cost, the initiation cost for the borrowing program. And $300,000 is an amount that is to help us extend the pilot project over the course of the time that we need to recruit the upfront funding and secure the other outcome payers.
Please continue.
Okay, slide 23. We look at AO 2020-26, and if we move to slide 24, this is the secure account that's required by our partners. This simply sets up the account so that we will have a place to deposit the funds once they're drawn down. Okay, we go to slide 25, coming attractions. In the last work session, I want to say thank you. I think this is such a complex project, and we're all coming from it at different places, but there was a lot of really helpful dialogue around the project and this concept, which we know is very new to all of us. If you turn to slide 26, these are some examples of other projects that have launched permanent supportive housing, a very similar model to what we're proposing in Denver, Santa Clara, Los Angeles County, and Massachusetts. we wanted to give you this slide so that you have an idea of the way that outcomes are priced. And these give you ideas around the metrics that have been used across projects, which you can see some similar things that we're talking about in our project. Housing stability. One of the projects, the Denver project, for instance, uses relative percentage of reduction in jail days. We're not at this moment focusing on that, but we will be focusing on something that's relevant to the municipality, that is a reduction in sleep ops center use. So you can see that communities are able to tailor the outcome payments that will be made according to the needs and the priorities of each community. Are there any questions on this? These are, again, I just want to say these are samples. We haven't had a chance to really run the numbers for our project until we really get to the next step where social finance is working with investors and recruiting them in to the program. And once we know our total investment amount, see what the outcome payments under that would be.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chair? This is Austin.
Yeah, you can, but for folks in general, please text me if you'd like in the queue. Go ahead, Austin.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just worried it would zoom by this before we got to it. So have you actually defined for us what the outcomes would be for Anchorage? I know you're giving some examples, and then you just said something about the investors evaluating that further, but I just don't understand what we would be paying for. Like, what exactly are we trying to achieve through doing this program?
Yes, thank you for that question. That will be part of the coming attractions that we want to highlight. Is there will be a next step for the assembly in this process. And that will be where we will be able to provide a substantive amount of the detail that will be in the contract. And that will include our outcome metrics that we're looking for. And I can tell you the broad categories we're looking at are housing stability, which means that a person is not falling out of housing, they're remaining stable in housing. That is also a proxy for quality support services. And so we're not seeing them back in the police calls, fire calls, or at sleep ops center. Housing stability is something of an umbrella that, that looks at all of those aspects. The second one is specific because at the moment it's the municipalities' place to set these outcome payments. We're interested in a reduction in stays at the safety center. The Anchorage Safety Center is a contract that's run by the health department, and we know that there are lots of negative outcomes that come from cycle through that program. So those are the two outcome metrics that are in discussion right now. Does that give enough information?
Yeah, that makes sense. So it seems a little bit out of order that we are asked to authorize, and I'm not sure where this money is coming from either. That's another question I have, but that we're asked to authorize this much money without even knowing what the money is doing specifically. So I'm just struggling a little bit with that.
Through the chair.
Yes.
That is the crux of it. This is a different role for the municipality than we've had in other projects where we just have a proposal and we directly fund it. What we're doing with this action is we're saying we will put this money, we will have this money available, and that allows social finance to go out and recruit upfront investors who will help provide the money to implement the intervention. And so we wouldn't think about making an outcome payment until we're 6 months into the project. we've been using January of 2021 as our timeline, but current events may change that. I just want to put a placeholder out there that there's a lot happening in the world right now, and so we're trying to keep this project going exactly as we had planned it on our timeline. And then the next step is the contract, and really nothing will happen until there's a contract. So we need to come back to the assembly for that next step. And so I do understand it is a little bit of the cart before the horse, but I do want you to understand that there's a next step that is one that will have more detail about exactly what you're buying.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. We have Mr. Slivka is also asked to speak. Mr. Slivka?
I guess I'm just going to re-emphasize what Nancy said, that we need this authorization to demonstrate to the funders who are actually going to pay for the program that we are willing to pay for the success of the program. So as Nancy said, you authorize us to borrow the money, then social finance goes out and finds the funders who are willing to pay for the services immediately, and then based on the success, which is, as Nancy said, we will come back to you in a few months with what those terms are going to be for your review and approval, and then only from there do we actually start to get to a point where if we achieve success, do we actually utilize the borrowing program to make the success payments?
Thank you, Mr. Slivka. I think Mr. Constant wanted to speak to this directly, and then we've got Ms. Zolotel in the queue to ask a question. Mr. Constant, you had a comment on this?
Yeah, I believe we discussed this at our last or the prior work session, and the idea is that we would take out the loan and put it in the bank, but we wouldn't spend it. That it would be authorized in increments over time by us. And so the only thing that we're required to do is secure the funding. That's my understanding.
Mr. Slivka, do you want to?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, great. Okay, Ms. Zolotel, you had a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought that what was before us wasn't actually borrowing the money, but just saying we would stand up an account, and until we had the contract provisions, we wouldn't authorize the borrowing of the money. So I'm a little bit confused.
So,
can someone walk it through one more time?
Mr. Slivka?
Yeah, through the chair, we're asking two things. We're asking you, one, to set up the account, that is 2026, and then we're also asking for authorization of the borrowing program 2020-25, and that borrowing program is, we will utilize the account route which we are asking you to set up in order to fund this program through the borrowing program. I do want to point out that we are also asking for immediate authority to spend $300,000 to continue the pilot program from, I believe, July 1 through September 30, and then also $150,000 for borrowing costs, with the note that we're not going to cover those borrowing costs immediately either.
May I ask a follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you. So why would we be shifting the pilot program suddenly to municipal costs when I don't believe we're currently funding it?
Through the chair, the answer to that is in order to keep the pilot program in place, and some of that has to do with the fact that we were on a timeline which we thought we would have this already established and in place prior to the June 30 termination of the existing pilot, but this program has been delayed, and so that's why we are asking for this $300,000 in order to keep the current program in place until we are able to solicit the initial funders to continue the program.
Thank you, Mr. Slivka.
And
Ms. Burke, do you have any follow-up
can
to
I
that?
do one more?
Yeah, well,
I have one. Yeah, additional.
I'm sorry, Ms. Burke, do you have anything to add to that? I I don't know.
Apologies, I was on mute. No, I think that's right. That's correct.
Okay. Ms. Zolotel, do you have another follow-up?
Yes, thank you. Do we have any indication right now that proceeding under the timeline still makes sense in light of current circumstances, either from social finance or others? Because I could see these projects maybe not, I don't know, getting pushed aside or at least delayed for a period of time. And I guess that ties into, do we need to authorize this borrowing program now, or could it wait until we get more specifics? Because I think we have a lot up in the air that we really don't know, or can we not get the specifics unless we authorize the borrowing program? Thank you.
Ms. Burke, can you answer that?
Apologies, I keep muting so that I don't cause feedback. I would like to ask if Jake Seagal or Annie Deere, who are on the line, could speak to that, and then I'll follow that, please.
Thank you. And if folks could identify themselves when they speak.
Hi, this is Jake Seagal with Social Finance. I think it's a good question, and I think we've all discussed there's a lot that is up in the air right now, especially in the context of a pretty changing day-to-day situation on the ground. There are kind of two things that are on our mind. The first is the necessity of continuing to move forward in order to keep the planning process for this going, in that getting folks off the street and into housing is, of course, community priority, but also a priority in light of the kind of virus expansion. So, not dropping the ball on some of the long-term, really important things like this. The second is, to your kind of second half of that question, in order to really nail parts of this, we need to have the kind of outcome payment mechanism and security in place before we're able to, go out and, for example, raise capital against the project. And so, moving forward on this will allow us to kind of move forward and finalize the contract.
Okay. And would anyone else like to speak to that question?
This is Nancy. I think the question also about the planning process dovetailing on the pilot project. We have people in housing. We believe we could keep going with that, and that we could restart our enrollment. We've paused for a bit because everybody's taking care of business right now. And this is certainly the time that we feel we need to get people into housing. And so it almost increases my urgency to keep this project on track.
Thank you, Nancy. Would anyone else like to speak?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, who is that?
Christopher Constant.
What's up?
I share the urgency of the long-term picture, but I would ask the members and the staff and everyone to be very cautious about bringing into this conversation the issues of the current crisis, because I think it doesn't help the case to move this along by bringing in those items and those concerns. I think it actually hurts your case. Just be cautious, because I do support moving forward with this, but I hate to get wrapped around the axle of we need to wait because we're not maybe thinking so clearly.
Thank you. Thank you. I have Dee. Are you on the line? Do you want to call in or to speak?
Yeah, I'm on the line, but no, I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more people in the queue. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm wondering if any of the $40 million that was committed by the private sector late last summer, is that, do we think that might be invested in this Pay for Success program, or is this going to be totally separate from that?
Mr. Chair, this is Nancy. That resource is a part of the complementary work that's happening in the community. The $40 million has been focusing on the people behind the 40 million have been focusing on actual housing development. And so as we think about a pathway toward getting 150 people into housing, there's a certain vacancy rate right now that we're working for renting up units, but then at some point we're going to need more units. And so this project is in fact encouraging to the Rasmussen Foundation and those other partners that we would have a robust service model that could partner with their capital project plans as we move forward. So we go together with that 40 million.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Weddleton.
Oh, thanks. Are we going to flip through the rest of this PowerPoint, or is this the time to?
Oh, yeah, I guess that's true. Is there more to the PowerPoint, or are we?
We just have a few more things, and I could go through them very quickly, and then we have time for questions. So on the next one.
Before you do that, Nancy, there's a question from Ms. Kennedy, I think, on this slide. Ms. Kennedy?
Okay, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can wait, so just keep me in the queue, please.
Okay, will do. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Burke.
Okay, so I think we maybe have actually even touched on some of this. Is authorization to enter into the contract is a next step, and we're talking about May/June for that timeline. We'll be able to bring material terms from the contract, which would include some more specific information around our outcome metrics and what we would the cadence with which we would make payments and some of those aspects. And then the ordinance appropriating the 4.5 million and the semi-annual reporting on the outcomes to the Assembly would be also a part of that next action. I wanted to highlight, I know that these buckets, if you will, are confusing, and the question around the 40 million, I think I left off a point that there are some of those investors, including Providence Health Services, Primera, Alaska, and the Rasmussen Foundation, that have already said to us that they will commit $1.5 million to the project now. So they're ready to come in as investors, and the Mental Health Trust Authority has this in the queue for them to examine for funding, potential funding over their next few meetings. So we have other partners who are coming with us, and we've passed another step, or we've completed another step on the federal CIFRA funding application. There was a March 18th deadline to submit additional information, and a positive development happened in that work thanks to Deannis and her team. We were able to connect with the legal department at the state, and we think our data sharing agreements with the state for Medicaid information is on a path to be completed. So these are huge milestones that are laying the groundwork for this project, and we're pleased with the progress.
Okay.
Okay, so the question around, this is certainly, if we go to slide 28, this has been a high priority for the administration, talking about how we help some of these folks that aren't able to be served in the service system gain stable housing, and we wanted to just highlight some of the agreement that we see in the Assembly priorities that this body has set forward. We have all the other partners. United Way has long been a partner on homelessness. This is an increased commitment to the United Way to focus on adults who have very high vulnerabilities. So a lot of us are kind of walking out together into new territory, and it's actually just very exciting, and I'm really pleased to be with you here today. From home. Thank you for allowing me to be here from home.
Okay. So with that, Mr. Weddleton, you have some questions?
Yeah, thanks. So, I've gone to our meetings on this and read this stuff, and I'm trying to simplify it. And it seems like, can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. We have kind of wrapped together. We have a work plan. What do we do to help the situation? And once you accept that, then it becomes how do we pay for it? And one simple way is we just commit $4.5 million from our budget. We give it out to nonprofits who do this work. And we can say, and we expect you to do X, Y, Z, and if you don't, we're not going to pay you as much. And that seems fairly normal. I would expect that when we do give grants, that there are certain kind of performance requirements on it, and we watch and see were they successful. And at least if they weren't, then we don't give them money next year or whatever. But what we're doing here is, to me, it just seems a very complicated way to do it. Like you get a loan instead of just paying up front. Okay, we have to pay $150,000 for the privilege of doing that. So it mitigates a little bit of risk, but not a whole lot. So it really just seems like a very complicated way to pay for what is probably a pretty decent work plan. So I guess Mr. Slivka, now we have a big loan here. At what point some loans we just decide, and then others have to go out to a vote. Tell me the difference. And then, because this is a loan, do we pay it off with above tax cap money or below tax cap money? And is that the key issue why we're going this way?
Through the chair, this is Alex Slivka. The reason we're going this way is for the structure, which I would agree is complex, but remember what it does. It allows funders, not the municipality, to put money toward a goal that is very important to the municipality, and then the municipality pays them only upon achievement of success that has been pre-agreed to. So I think that's the reason why we're going this route. The second aspect of it is that the funding, the actual borrowing would happen when payment is needed. Yes, unfortunately, there are minimum fixed costs, but we believe that the functionality of this program kind of offsets the cost it's going to take on our side to actually borrow the money. And the final answer is we would need to budget for repayment of these loans in the normal course of our budgeting, and there's no above the cap, below the cap stuff. This is just straightforward.
Okay.
Any given year, we need to find $1.5 million to pay for it.
Okay. Well, if I could just follow up briefly.
Yes.
That's the question. Okay. Okay. So if we buy lots of stuff, so we buy trucks for solid waste services, and if we get it, and go, hey, that's not the truck we ordered, we don't pay. So do we now, when we give grants, we don't follow up, we don't have expectations that they perform? I mean, that's kind of the implication here, is to get the performance we want, we have to go through this convoluted mechanism, and that doesn't make sense.
Mr. Chair?
I'm sorry, who is that?
So I'm done.
This is Nancy. May I address that question?
Yes.
The challenge that we have is something of what people call the wrong pocket problem, in that the services for this population is complex. And in Alaska, we have a scenario where some of the services are under the municipality's control, and a good amount of them are under the state of Alaska's control. And so the gap that exists in the services for this very complex population is a challenge, and it's hard to get the right money in the right place, and especially as we go through these times where the state budget is now under tremendous pressure. This mechanism allows us a pretty safe way to not only say we're going to put up $4.5 million, it will leverage all of these other investors, and we only pay back if the intervention is successful. In the grant world, we can say, well, we want you to do this grant and we want you to do this service. And I actually would say we've done this before with a couple of providers, saying we want you to take the top 200 from our sleep off center list, and we want you to focus on them and house them. And it's never enough. It's not enough to have that straightforward grant mechanism. This allows us to get a more robust service delivery system in place with very little risk to government, and because we only pay back when it's successful.
Okay, John, do you have any other follow-ups?
No, thank you.
Okay, so in the queue I have Ms. Kennedy, Mr. Constant, Ms. Salatel. We'll start with you, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess to a certain extent I thought I understood this, but now it seems like it gets even more complicated. I think my question is in regard to Home for Good and how this actually plays into this, because my understanding of setting up this account was in order for us to be able to help fund those organizations, agencies that could provide services that would help with the homeless population, and if they were successful in doing something that we thought was what was necessary, then we would pay them for that. But with the other ordinance, it talks about specifically Home for Good, that we are designating specific money for that specific project concept, if you will. So it sounds to me like that we may already be saying, well, we've already decided who's going to be the players in this funding. And so I guess that's my question, is by saying that we are doing this in order to provide funding for Home for Good projects, are we basically eliminating any other organizations that may not be part of that collaborative?
Through the chair.
Yep.
If the phone participants and in the room, if we could go back to slide 17, I think it's just worth really emphasizing how this model works once again. We have this project, these two ordinances are focusing around the finance mechanism, which is a pay-for-success mechanism, which means we hold funds in reserve. We recruit upfront money from other philanthropic and investment entities to implement the change that we want to see in our community. And then the government pays back only when those changes are achieved. So Assemblymember Kennedy is correct. There's two sort of pieces to this. In Anchorage, our project is called Home for Good. And we just saw a slide that had Denver's project, and they had they're sort of branding them and have a specific name for each of those. Our intervention that's being used is a supported housing model. It is worth noting that the reason we ran a pilot was to essentially figure out the capacity of our providers, the experience, the ability to put together a robust service model in a way that will meet the outcomes that the municipality needs to see. And so there was when we received the first funding for the pilot project, we ran a competition, we ran a public RFP, and entities responded to that. So we've been collaborating with those entities to operate the pilot program. The next step is really the formal contract. We were essentially practicing what we needed to know under the Home for Good program in our Pay for Success finance model. And so now the next step is to turn back to the structures that the municipality needs to establish, set up our contract, have our accounts in place, and the money that will allow us to recruit upfront investors, have that money ready to go. And so then those are the next steps that we'll be returning to the Assembly to work on. Is that enough information?
Do you have a follow-up, Ms. Kennedy?
Yes, I think so. And I think my question is probably more simple or requires a simple answer. My question really is, are we totally focused on everybody or funding everybody that is already basically agreeing to the Home for Good outcome project?
I'm going to take a stab and make sure I'm understanding your question. When we sent out the request for proposals, we had a number of proposals that came back, and there were approximately 5 organizations that provided this kind of service and had enough capacity to work at the level that we're talking about in this project. So we've been working with those 5 entities. We've started with 2. We're having a conversation with a 3rd provider now, and over the course of the time, we will engage additional providers as we're able in the project. Did that answer your question?
That does help. I guess more specifically, I will ask, are there people that are providing other services in this concept other than housing? Because I know the ordinance 2020-26 relates to providing wraparound services. So to me, that sounds like a pretty broad range of typical services. But it seems to me like all I'm hearing about is actual housing. So I'm trying to get a sense of what all we will actually be providing, or what these different entities will be providing, and do we have a good range of services, or are we really just focusing this $5 million on housing?
Through the chair.
Yep.
Thank you for that question. The slide just before the slide we reviewed, starting at slide 11, but probably most succinctly summarized on slide 16, is an example of the kinds of services that go along with what's referred to in the field as a permanent supported housing program. And this is a thing that I'm putting in my brain very strongly, that I refer to permanent supportive housing programs and don't refer to the mental health services, the substance abuse services, the skills training that happens with people around budgeting and cooking and cleaning, the social skill development that helps people resolve problems that they might have with their neighbors, incidental teaching moments that happen when you're in a unit with someone, helping them recognize signs of things that might be problematic for them. There is a long, long list of things that happen that are not adequately summarized as housing, as sometimes I do. So I'm going to make a note about that to myself.
Thank you, Ms. Burke.
I appreciate that, Ben. I really do appreciate that, because that really was part of my confusion in all of this, is I keep hearing about housing, or just the title, the name Home for Good, I think is a little bit of a misnomer itself. So anyway, so I appreciate that answer. That gives me a better perspective on what all might be being provided, or entities might be being invited to participate in those ways. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So a couple comments and then my question. I think that we did hear earlier at the work session and again today that there was a competition, a solicitation that went into building the pilot for this effort, and that this is just the next step. And so any limitation on who's participating, who's at the table, is based and structured on that previous solicitation. And I'm actually comfortable with that, even though professionally speaking, I work in a nonprofit that provides some services that might fall under some of the umbrellas. And in some ways we have no way to participate. And So I think I'm satisfied that the competitive part of this process was actually conducted in a way that is meaningful. And that said, I am on slide number 28, assembly priorities, and I personally am very skeptical of any of these permanent supportive housing providers making any claim that they're doing any form of substance use, actual interventions, treatment, support. Mental health, it's almost impossible not to, because those are everyday issues you have to deal with all the time. But so I think any claim that substance abuse is being addressed by this program, I think, is minimal at best, very limited. And so I still find myself supportive. But what I would like to know is, and I asked this before, I don't see it in the presentation, maybe it's here. What happens at year 5? What happens when this round is done, when we've spent $5 million, when this projected out to year 4 is accomplished? What's the plan?
Through the chair, would you like me to respond?
Sure, yes, please.
I have personally been sitting in on some of the case conferencing recently, if I could address Assemblymember Constant's first question, and the kinds of services that people are ready to avail themselves of when they first get into housing might be a different array than what we would see a year or maybe even 2 in. And, for instance, the teams are spending quite a bit of time of helping people who are actively delusional and having mental health concerns. But I do have a little bit of data from the pilot that I'd like to share if that would be useful and helpful for this conversation. One of the reasons we're looking at housing stability is we know that that's a placeholder for the work that would be done to prepare a person for substance abuse treatment services. And we talk about harm reduction in a way that is helping people move off of very harmful substances that happen on the street. And then a number of people in these programs continue on the trajectory toward sobriety or toward substance use treatment. So just from the 21 people that we reported on, we have the 21 people who've been housed in a housing unit, we've seen a 60% reduction in shelter stays and a 78% reduction in arrests. 4 of the participants have had an absence since their first lease, since they entered a lease. 2 of them have returned to permanent supportive housing because the teams went out and actively found them on the street and engaged them back into housing. 2, we have not been able to return to housing. I just want to say that this is a limited sample and the analysis is really just looking at individual people. But as the pilot continues, we anticipate seeing this level of performance on the program, which could mean that we see reductions in use of those high-level emergency services that today are part of the number of a number of people's lives. So in year 5, it's my interest and hope that we are examining this. This really gives us an opportunity to see what the actual costs are to stabilize people in the community. And over time, we anticipate seeing people stabilize, which means that they may fit into a regular.
I'm sorry, you cut out there for a second, Nancy. What?
Oh, I'm sorry. I talk with my hands and I hit mute.
Okay.
So we'll see people stabilize. When we monitored some of the original Housing First units, we saw that people over time became stable and their Medicaid billing went up and they sort of fit into the regular service delivery, if you will. That should happen for these folks who are high cycling right now over the course of the 3 years. I want to emphasize that it's 3 years. It's not 5 years. So that's one clarification point. What may happen in the end is we'll have data back on this entire cohort, and the municipality may see these outcomes and say, this is something that's worthwhile. We know that the total service pool was about 350 people. We're taking 150 in this project. The municipality may decide to do this again. The municipality may decide, no, we're in a different way of thinking, or we have other priorities, so we're not going to do this again. And what we'll have to do is identify the difference in support service needs and resource needs, and we'll have to recruit in our state partners and philanthropic partners and make sure that we can make the service, maintain the service continuum for the people after they've stabilized. I'll take a breath.
So I would just note that your slide 30 shows 4 years, because there's still the ongoing payment period. And so it might be 3 years of direct services, but you're asking us to contemplate a 5-year program, or at least a 4-year program, according to your slides. So I'm not sure which is which, but I would assume the whole package is the pilot plus 4. And so, but whatever, that's the question is what happens next. And what I heard, I think, was that we can pay for it again if it's working. And I'm not opposed to this. I believe that your framing of permanent supportive housing does all of the things that you said it does, other than any claims toward making headway for people in their substance use issues. But I still, after all of this, and you and I 10 years at this conversation, believe this is the right way we should go, despite my hesitancy on other matters.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. We have 2 more folks in the queue, Ms. Zolotel, Mr. Perez-Radia, and then we'll wrap up this work session. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you. So my question, I think, may have just been answered, but so I just want to restate so I make sure I understand. So to ensure that we're not back to square one when the Pay for Success Home for Good project ends, we're hoping that the acuity of the need of these individuals will go down so that they fit within the government offered benefits, and that we won't need to subsidize those services any longer. But what happens if they don't? Or that that's my concern, is that we don't have a plan B other than to keep subsidizing the services if in fact these folks aren't eligible for something, or their needs can't be met with just what is already available.
Mr. Burke, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, through the chair. That's a summary of where we are. We need to do this project. We need to understand where the gaps are and why there's 350 people in our service system that we haven't been able to house to date. And the state is helping us because they're coming along with a better service array for this population. When the 1115 waiver does launch, we believe that will be a more sustainable service resource for the population. Whether or not there's enough housing vouchers and ability to help with the subsidies that are needed for the population is a second question. And these are all questions that we really need to address with our state partners. That's a great example. The housing subsidies come from the state of Alaska, and it could be that Anchorage decides that we can't wait for the state to get more money or to try to spread their resources more thinly, and we need to take this on ourselves. Those are questions that need to be an active part of the project as we go forward.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Okay, so we'll go on. Mr. Perez-Radia?
Thank you. Just a comment and then a question also. The comments are, based on some of the questions I've heard from other members, I'm still concerned that there may be a fair bit of confusion about what this is and how it works. So I guess I would really encourage members, if you are not really clear about exactly how it works, to reach out to Ms. Burke and to get your questions answered. Second, I want to just voice my support for this. I do believe that it actually is a very innovative way for us to begin to address some of the really serious challenges that we have. Third, Ms. Book, if you could just speak to how this work is going to help us with one of the areas that I'm most concerned with, and that is data. Having the kind of information that we need to have a better sense of what we have and what we don't have, where people are at, and how this project is going to help us to be more data rich and give us the kind of information that will help us to make good decisions in the future. If you could speak to that, please. Thank you.
Through the chair, that is such a rich part of this project and has been a really robust part of the discussions in the pilot, in that there has not been a way to track data for this population in the past, because they span some different service sectors, if you will. And one of the requirements of our grantees is a very detailed listing of the data and what's happening with the people and the costs. And I think our providers have been adjusting to the fact that, yes, we're tracking every single thing in this project. And so we're able to give you even a little snapshot of data, because there's a weekly data discussion around what's happening. That, combined with the fact that for the first time in the community, police, fire, sleep off, and homeless data are now being routinely integrated and producing a list of prioritization. That in itself is a huge win and an advancement in the data that we need to be successful as the administration and the Assembly, I would argue.
Thank you. I'm sorry, do you have anything further, Mr. Perez-Medea?
No, just we
Nope, that's
are.
it. Thank you, sir.
Okay. I have one.
Should I answer?
Is that Ms. Burke? Okay. I have one more question from Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Between having two different work sessions and also being on the phone, if I've missed some of that, just let me know, or some of the things I'm about to ask. I have two questions. One is, where does the money come from? So say it works and we need to pay the investors. Where do we get it? And if the answer is just out of our budget, how are we planning to allocate $5 million for something? And maybe I'm misunderstanding how we spend it at which point. And then two, did Path to Independence work? So if that's the model we're using and we're basing it on this, was it effective? And if so, how?
Through the chair, the $5 million needs to be budgeted in some way. There has been a number of different discussions around utilizing equity from the ML&P sale or some new revenue source. I think those conversations need to continue happening as we go forward. And so that's the question about where's the money come from. It needs to be budgeted. The second thing I'd like to say is, if you think about a continuum of need of people who are needing less service, more ready to go back to work, and more independent, if you will, that end of the continuum is Path to Independence, and it uses a lighter service model than this one. So I would say we're not basing it as much on Path to Independence, but an advancement in some of the Housing First projects that we've done in the community in the past, in that we're not operating from one specific site. Excuse me. We're using a number of different housing options, so we're not just using one location in the community. It really is a more robust model, and I would say that both of those models have been successful in the community for the populations that they're serving. This is just a more intensive population than the Path to Independence program.
Okay.
Got it. So it's not a perfect model. There are other programs that have worked across the country that we're basing our expectation of success on.
Yes, and in fact, I would refer you to the slide that had the outcome payment estimates. Those projects have been operating a number of years and have shown success. That might be a good place to look. Yeah.
Yep, I'm on that slide. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
No worries. Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, with that, unless there are further questions from my colleagues, I don't see any in the queue. We're going to close this work session.